I'm just trying to get the sun out of my eyes, but then it makes it too dark, so I'm trying to work on that. I'm going to wait till a couple people show up. We'll start in about a minute. And you can just go back and rewatch this. So, back. Sorry, I'm getting some echo. Testing 1, 2, 3. I don't even know why this is doing this. Okay, I'm just going to go with this crappy mic. Okay, so I'm going to start over. This video is about the suspension of Paul Gosselin. I don't know why I'm getting that echo. It was working fine before. Paul Gosselin. I don't know why I'm getting that echo. It was working fine before. Paul Gosselin. I don't know why I'm getting that echo. It was working fine before. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry, that's Figgy. Figgy, hush. Okay, I'm just going to put my headphones down real low so I don't hear this double. Okay, so sorry about this. I had it working perfectly fine earlier today. So in November of 2021, the Maine Medical Licensing Osteopathic Licensing Board suspended Dr. Paul Gosselin's license on an emergency basis, which means that somebody was in imminent, could be in imminent harm, or their safety was at immediate risk. So what they, I'm just going to go back, sorry. So what they said is, and I'm going to share that screen. So what they said is that Dr. Goslin has engaged in conduct that constitutes fraud or deceit, incompetence, and unprofessional conduct by writing the V exemptions letters. So when the hearing actually finally began in April of 2022, they dropped fraud or deceit from this charge. Sorry. Okay, so they dropped the fraud and deceit. And now they're left with unprofessional conduct, and they don't seem to be arguing in the hearing incompetence. It's really just about him writing those V's. So let's move forward. Oops. And let's talk about the board. The board is made up of a physician's assistant, doctors, public members, and the board is made up of Melissa Michaud, who's a physician's assistant, and she is the chair. James Piscini, who is the vice chair and specializes in anesthesiology. John Brewer, who is a family medicine doctor. John Gaddis, who's a family medicine doctor. Marty McIntyre, who is a public member. Those public members are appointed by the governor. Brian Gillis, who's a proctologist. Peter Michaud, who is a public member, but he's not just any public member, and we're going to get to Peter in just a moment. Christine Monroe, who's an internal medicine doctor. Rebecca Vose, who's a physician's assistant. And Lisa Ryan, who is a pediatrician. So part of what the board does is it investigates complaints. The members of the board, as I said, are appointed by the governor. And one of the parts of their mission statement is to provide the public a forum to have complaints heard and impartially investigated. And we're going to see shortly why that isn't exactly the case, particularly when it comes to Peter Michaud. This is Peter Michaud. He is not only a public member, he's also former general counsel for the Maine Medical Association. He was also prominent in the passage and writing of LD 798 in 2019, when and LD 798 was the bill that took away parents and healthcare workers' rights to use a philosophical or religious exemption to the V. And he downplays his role in writing it. Ryan Tipping was the one who introduced the bill, and in my opinion, Ryan Tipping was just Michaud's useful idiot for this bill going forward. So let's go on with Peter. The defense, Dr. Goslin's attorneys, filed a motion for Mr. Michaud to recuse himself based on bias. He refused to do so. So let's take a little bit of look at his bias. Here he is scaring people with the iron lungs for not getting a vaccine. Oops, sorry, the V. He's talking about the kickoff for the No campaign, and he's talking about the anti-science, anti-vaxxers. And here he is with the scare tactics again. The people's veto to nix the vaccine bill could end lives. Voting yes won't stick it to big pharma. Kind of would. It will put you at risk from dangerous diseases. We dip below herd immunity status. We cannot afford exceptions. Well, first of all, that's a lie. We're not below herd immunity status. There may be one or two places in Maine that might be below, but overall, when you average it out, we are far above immunity, herd immunity. And this is another interesting one. This is about prominent scientist Peter Hotez, who wants to lead a campaign against anti-vaxxers. And for the first time since their movement began 20 years ago, children are dying or in ICUs because of anti-vaxxers. And what he's not telling you here is that Peter Hotez is a scientist. He also makes a lot of money making bees. And here is a retweet. Here is a retweet where he talks about everybody wanting a V until it's available. And here he is attacking Kara Sachs, who I know personally, and saying she's attacking the credibility of No on One's well-respected pediatrician, Dr. Blaisdell. She was also another huge proponent of LD 798. And now she, I believe, is working for Maine Pediatrics Association, or Association of Pediatrics Maine division. And I'm not going to go into Wakefield right now in his studies, but that's sort of another misleading comment. His studies really weren't retracted due to fraud and financial benefits. It was a whole much bigger story that he's not getting into. And frankly, it's just too long to get into right now. Here is another one. And okay, you lost me at Bill Nemitz. This bill effectively explains the blindfolded, directionless rationale of Maine, quote, anti-Vs. And that's just a pejorative to put down people who don't think like Peter Michaud. And here's another one. And by the way, this share of the refutations to anti-vaccine memes that Michaud posted in April of 2020, refutations to anti-vaccine memes is one of the nastiest, most awful Facebook pages you will ever come across. And I've been on the page, I've looked at it. It's heartbreaking what they do and say about parents who want to protect their children, like I did. I have twins. One was perfectly fine with the V. The other one had serious adverse reactions. And I decided I was never going to put her through that again. But LD 798 took away my right to protect my child. And no doctor, Emily, and no doctor will write a medical exemption because, and you can see why. Look what's happening to Paul Gosselin. Here's just another one of Peter retweeting the Maine Medical Association, for which he was general counsel. I don't think by 5/11, I think right around that time, he retired from the Maine Medical Association. So again, he's reminding you of the importance of the V's. And he is also, I just can't see this, sorry. And then he goes on a little bit lower that the Board of Licensure in Medicine says it would be unprofessional conduct to prescribe those early treatment medications, which I have to tell you I took, and I was sicker with bronchitis than I was with that Divock, which is the word backwards. And here is the Mass Karen, Peter Michaud, talking about Hannaford regressing and complaining about the employees watching the carts had their masks down. I think he meant washing their masks down around their necks, and they were vendors in the store with no masks at all. Most customers were masked except for the usual few aggressively ignorant jerks. So we kind of see his bias here. And here's one where Michaud shares a Guardian article where Boris Johnson is saying that anti-vaxxers are nuts. I'm going to share a new screen with you where we're going to, I'll just show you real quickly. Let's see. Okay, so this is the full transcript of that November 18, 2021 meeting. You'll see, and I'll post it again later, the speaker key for who's talking in this transcript. We have James Piscini, Lisa Wilson, Peter Michaud, who has a lot to say, Brian Gillis, an unidentified male, an unidentified female, an unidentified female board member, unidentified male board member, and just an unidentified male board member. So Piscini starts off that, whoops, I'm going too fast. They received 4 separate complaints, not from patients, from healthcare providers. And we'll see later why the healthcare providers' reports aren't exactly accurate. So they got 4 separate complaints from healthcare providers that Dr. Gosselin has been acting, quote, inappropriately regarding the DIVIC-19, promoting it as a hoax and spreading, quote, misinformation. And here's what's interesting is the Osteopathic Board of Licensure never defines what misinformation is. And as we all know, what was misinformation last year turns out to be true this year. So I'm going to stop this screen and I'm going to go to one of my articles where we go through and you can see how Peter Michaud in this transcript that I have here really urges the board to take immediate emergency action on the licensee. That's not my Chrome tab. Window. There we go. So here we go with the article that we wrote on March 10th. This is before any of the hearings happened. Remember, his license was suspended in November 2021. He entered into a consent agreement shortly after that to not write any more letters. So at this point, all this sort of witch hunt is moot, but they're not backing down. So Peter Michaud has a seeming bias and lack of impartiality with regard to the case against Dr. Gosselin. We're going to see how in just a minute. So we already went through the members. Okay, so in the video, here is Michaud downplaying his role in writing LD 798. He says, my authorship is pretty simple. XYZ is repealed. Well, repealing XYZ, which is the philosophical and religious exemptions, are what the whole law was about. It wasn't about anything else than taking that away from Maine citizens. So here is, let me know if you can hear this, Laura. This is Peter talking at the public hearings in March of 2019 at the State House. Okay, I'm going to pause that right there. Oh, you can't hear him? All right, let me see if this works. Let me see if this works. I'm pausing him, Laura, just to see. I'm pausing him because I'm playing it from an article rather than an actual video. So he's saying that Big Pharma had no role in this, but when 798 filed a people's veto to get on the ballot, Big Pharma did come into this campaign, and I believe they donated $800,000 to $900,000 to fight the people's veto at the ballot. Oh, mother of God. Wait a second. Testing. Is that working, Laura? This is so frustrating. I did a test run earlier and it was fine. Okay, so Peter Michaud said that this wasn't about Big Pharma being involved in LD 798. And maybe at that time when he was giving testimony, it wasn't. But towards the end, when the LD 798 people against it made a people's veto and got this on the ballot, Big Pharma did contribute $800,000 to $900,000 to fight the ballot initiative and get people out to vote. So I'm just going to go back down here a little bit more. So on March 2nd, Gosselin's attorneys filed a motion for recusal of Peter Michaud based on what it perceived as bias. So some of the things the attorneys think that Michaud had already had his mind made up. And you can see in some of the testimony later that he is already questioning. His mind is completely made up. There's no hearing this with impartiality. I don't think. I've been watching him. I've been watching his little screen during the hearings, and I don't think so. So the council states that they got the transcript, which I showed you a little bit of earlier, and that's why I didn't go through it all, because I'm going to go through the important parts of it right here. The attorneys in their filing say the recording is extraordinary and exposes Mr. Michaud as an unacceptably biased board member who lacks the requisite impartiality to adjudicate these proceedings. Again, Michaud refused to recuse himself. He did not want to be left out of this hearing. He says, the attorneys say Michaud drove the board's decision-making process at the November 18 meeting. And we're going to see a little bit about that. Let's see. Mr. Michaud abused the board's authority and process and ignored the advice of board's legal advisor, that's Assistant Attorney General Lisa Wilson, in bad faith in order to manufacture artificial grounds for the emergency suspension of Dr. Gosselin's license. So this is part of the testimony. Michaud pressed for immediate action without a hearing. This is one of his comments in that transcript. He, meaning Gosselin, this is Michaud speaking, presents an immediate and significant threat to public health. I'm wondering, Ms. Wilson, if it is possible for the board to skip the complaint process and go directly to an action in court or a temporary order and on an action by the Attorney General's office before a judge. So the attorneys go on to say how 5 MRS 1 section 10004 says the grounds on which the board may suspend a license without a hearing. And that's where the health or physical safety of a person is immediately in jeopardy at the time of the agency's action. And that simply wasn't the case. The attorneys go on to say that statute simply does not contemplate some inchoate speculative future jeopardy to future unknown persons, and the board's legal counsel knew it. So Lisa Wilson, the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Maine, is the board's legal advisor. She gave her opinion regarding an immediate suspension of Dr. Gosselin's medical license, stating, "I did talk with some of my colleagues in the office about whether this would be a candidate for immediate suspension. We don't think it meets the threshold." Now remember that. The Attorney General is advising that they don't think this meets the threshold. But we all know that they still went ahead and did an emergency suspension. So here is Assistant Attorney General. Oh yeah, Michaud's a lawyer. He was general counsel for the Maine Medical Association. He's also a nurse, and I believe, and I don't have the dates, that he was also a lobbyist. I have to double check that. So here is AAG Lisa Wilson telling Mr. Michaud that there were no grounds for an emergency suspension. But again, as we all know, they did an emergency suspension. So I will say in response to Mr. Michaud's question, normally when the board wants to act immediately like that, the board utilizes the section of the statute that authorizes immediate suspension without hearing. Those can be issued in cases where there is immediate jeopardy, and otherwise, to go through the complaint process would fail to adequately respond to a known risk to physical health or safety. Remember, this is about writing letters. It's not performing a procedure on anyone. It is not doing any invasive medical procedures. It was writing letters. So she goes on to say, I did talk with, again, I repeated this, some of my colleagues in the office about whether this would be a candidate for immediate suspension, because obviously it's extremely concerning. However, we don't think it meets that threshold. I mean, as you know, the deadline for healthcare providers to get the V information was in the end of October. So this is probably largely wrapped up, because at the end of October, They weren't writing any more letters. So I would think that you move, and I don't know why that cut off. Michaud then continued a push for his desired outcome, which was an immediate suspension. So the attorneys say Mr. Michaud knew that the board's legal advisor was right, but ignored her and continued to push his agenda, which is not truly about Dr. Gosselin's exemption letters at all, but instead about the implementation of his own personal biases and political agenda regarding Divic 19 and these. I'm also concerned, this is Michaud speaking, I'm also concerned that he discusses Divic as a hoax and that he proposes debunked forms of so-called treatment and prophylaxis. I think this is a serious one. I think this is a very serious one, and I would like to see us take significant action immediately. Well, I've talked to quite a few of his patients, including a very close friend of mine, where his early treatment saved their lives. They had gone to the hospital twice. Twice they were sent home with no treatment and told to come back when they couldn't breathe. So instead, he treated and helped these people. And for that, Mr. Michaud is furious. The attorneys go on to say that Dr. Gosselin never referred to Divic as a hoax. The two medications have never been, quote, debunked. I mean, I took one of those medications and I got better rather quickly. I was tired for a while, but I was sicker when I had bronchitis in March than I was in January with Divic. So numerous state legislatures and attorneys general are moving to create safe harbors for doctors, not Maine, but other attorney generals, for doctors who wish to prescribe those medications without fear of the type of punitive action that has been taken against Dr. Gosselin. The Oklahoma Attorney General recently stated, oh, yes, Laura, he has saved many lives. The Oklahoma Attorney General stated, I stand behind doctors who believe it is their patients' best interests to receive those medications. Our healthcare professionals should have every tool available to combat Divic. Public safety demands this. Physicians who prescribe medications and follow the law should not fear disciplinary action for prescribing such drugs. So even when two board members agreed with AAG Wilson, Michaud persisted, and yet he persisted. At least two different board members agreed with Wilson. One stated, but that's over, he's not writing any more of those letters. Another stated, yeah, one of the concerns, unfortunately, is some sort of closing the barn door after the animals have left. And again, he did enter into a consent agreement not to write these letters, but they're continuing with this persecution and this farce of a hearing over, right now, it's over 3 months, which will mean since they suspended his license in November of 2021, and this is now going to a hearing again, the rest of the hearing tomorrow. Hopefully it will be done tomorrow. The defense is putting on its case tomorrow with this expert witness. That will be 7 months that it's been suspended. And I don't know what other punitive action they're going to take against him. They've already hurt him. They've hurt his income. They've hurt the patients that got kicked to the street. And we all know that you cannot find a doctor with a new practice to just join quickly and out of the blue. I mean, I helped out my administrative assistant today at the town offices. She needed a ride. She was feeling sick on Monday at the meeting, and her husband came to pick her up. She left her car there, and I went to go pick her up at her house today. And she's still really, really, really sick. She couldn't get a doctor's appointment for 2 weeks. She's sick and she's in tremendous amount of pain. And she couldn't get an appointment for 2 weeks. The doctor said, well, if you go to the ER and they discharge you without any sort of treatment, call us back and I can probably get you in within 10 days. So what do you think happened to all of these patients that the board just kicked out by revoking that licensed on an emergency basis. There was no time to find other doctors or have prescriptions filled, or it's really sad for everybody all along. So two board members agree that the horses have left the barn. So Michaud persisted again, and the lawyers say it had nothing to do with his Dr. Gosselin and his exemption letters, and everything to do with Michaud's unauthorized agenda. He says, Michaud, in the state of Maine now, we have about 1,000 new cases a day. We have a handful of patients, 3, 4, 5, dying every day from DIVIC. 75 to 90% of those cases are people who are UNV, which we all know now. This happened in November of 2021, and if you go back and look at my stats and the information that I posted based on CDC data on breakthrough cases and hospitalizations, that's absolutely not true. So Michaud continues, I guess I've said that 3 or 4 times now, so what's the easiest way for us to stop him from issuing any other further statement, a letter, so that could endanger people in the future? How can we do that now? So AAG Wilson again attempted to dissuade Michaud, but then seemed to give in to his continued pressure for his desired outcome. This is Michaud. Wilson. I mean, you have the option to issue an immediate suspension. Because of, I absolutely hear you about the ongoing concern, but the letter period of time is mostly over. And ongoing advice, I agree it's very problematic, but we would probably need an expert on that if this is really a practice issue. So you could vote for an immediate suspension. So AAG Wilson cautioned Michaud about another fatal problem in the board's case. And you'll see that they already dropped fraud and deceit from the notice of suspension. They're not prosecuting that now. Basically, based on the testimony I've already seen, they're just basing it on the letters. And I'll go into a little more about what they're trying to do with what the prosecutors are trying to do with the letters. So, under pressure from Michaud, AAG Wilson had opened the door, and seeing his opening, Michaud intervened. Dr. Gillis, would you be willing to entertain a friendly amendment to your motion? So then Michaud personally articulated the amendment. In light of the daily risk of harm to the public regarding the spread of DIVIC to the public, and in light of the fact that misinformation tends to encourage, now, he's not being charged with misinformation from what I can see now, the public not to take medically recommended steps to protect themselves from the risk of DIVIC. So again, we all know now, and last year this was misinformation, we all know now that it does not protect anyone from catching DIVIC. It just is basically a treatment for that patient, for that singular patient, for its own symptoms and treating its own symptoms. It does not prevent transmission. Excuse me. So misinformation tends to encourage the public not to take medically recommended steps to protect themselves. And he should have known by November of 2021 about the transmission issues. He's being disingenuous. The board moves to suspend the licensee's ability to practice for 30 days, holding a hearing as soon as possible within the 30-day period. Now, this was November 18th. Gosselin soon after entered into a consent decree. No, it didn't stop the DIVIC. And I have to say that, Laura. So, what was I saying? Okay, so within 30-day period. So he entered into a consent agreement shortly after that. Gosselin had an expert witness ready to testify for him within that 30-day period. But then the other medical board went after his expert witness for basically the same thing. So she wasn't able to testify to him at hearing. So then the hearing got pushed out. His attorneys continued to file motions. They filed a motion to dismiss, which was denied by Rebecca Smith, the hearing officer. A motion to recuse Peter Michaud, which he refused. A motion for discovery that was never answered, according to his attorneys. So one of the complaints against Dr. Gosselin was his issuance of medical exemption letters for the DIVIC V to healthcare workers. In his testimony in support of LD 798 on March 13th, Michaud speaks about medical exemptions and states, "The practice of school nurses has been to accept a physician's written statement that immunization against one or more of the diseases may be medically inadvisable." That's the language of the statute. It's the language of the rule. Physicians may simply write, "In my medical opinion," and it doesn't say whether it's his medical opinion. This law doesn't say whether it's the medical opinion with regard to the patient and any comorbidities or issues they may have, or whether it's the medical opinion on the actual itself. So physicians may simply write, "In my medical opinion, child X should not be immunized for disease Y or for any disease because it is medically inadvisable." And that emphasis was added by me. So Michaud goes on at that committee hearing and told us that physicians may simply write, now this is Michaud, who has a big problem with these letters, "In my medical opinion, in my medical opinion, child X should not be immunized for Y because it is medically inadvisable." The Michaud, who was determined to immediately suspend a doctor's license for writing medical exemption, is now telling us that a doctor's opinion that is medically inadvisable is no longer valid. So which Michaud should we believe? The one who testified or the one who is now trying to suspend the license of a doctor for doing what he said is perfectly fine? So I asked in this article, what's the difference between a medical exemption for school and a medical exemption for DIVIC? One can reasonably argue that there is no difference, and Michaud's double standard and doublespeak makes no rational sense. All right, I am going to try this, Laura. Let me know if you hear this. This is another part of his testimony. Okay, I'm just going to stop because that just continues on with what I just read. So the motion for recusal filed by Gosselin's attorneys goes on to state more about Michaud's background, his role in removing religious and philosophical exemptions to requirements in Maine, and the exemptions which were repealed in the bill authored by Michaud, but submitted by Ryan Tipping, who I personally call, in my opinion, the useful idiot. Michaud was adamantly against allowing any exemptions to these except for a medical exemption. I'm just going to continue on. I shut it off, Laura, because I basically had just read it all and it wasn't important. So those who are against LD 798 collected signatures to place a referendum on the ballot so Maine voters could vote on this important legislation. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State scheduled this referendum during a Democratic primary and not the June 4th general primary that he initially told us it was going to be scheduled for. So I've already gone through with that video and posted some of his bias in his tweets. And And finally, the motion for recusal notes Michaud's role as general counsel for Maine Medical Association, and the motion points out that pharmaceutical companies are, in fact, listed as corporate affiliates of the Maine Medical Association. So they go on to say the MMA maintains a corporate affiliate program, which is mutually beneficial, which is a mutually beneficial financial relationship aligning the interests of the MMA with those of pharmaceutical companies. Shocking. Let's see. For several years, the association has maintained a corporate affiliate program allowing companies, firms, and other vendors which have been vetted by the association to jointly market their services and products to MMA members. The affiliates pay an annual dues to the association for the privilege. So, to summarize, the governor appoints public members to the board. One would presume these public members would have a general knowledge of medicine and be there to provide. Can you not hear me, Laura? Oh, it was just the video. So one would not presume that the public member would be a member of the establishment, which Peter Michaud is. One would not presume that a public member would have such sway over the legal counsel and other members of the board. Public member repeatedly ignored the AAG. I know, sorry, I have so much more. However, based on the motion for recusal filed by Gosselin's attorneys, we can see these presumptions were incorrect. So the actions taken by the board against Gosselin, just to continue, remind you, were because of complaints, not complaints by patients, but complaints by people who disagreed with Gosselin's medical opinion and treatment of Divic, and his medical opinion that Divic was medically inadvisable. So I ask in this article, because it was before the hearing, the final question is, will Michaud recuse himself? Hopefully you can hear my next one, because I'm going to do a little bit of testimony. The final question is, will Michaud recuse himself from the proceedings? And we all know now. I asked before that April 14th hearing, or will hubris not allow him to do so? And I think we all know the answer to that now. The hubris did not allow him to do so. Sorry, mute for a sec. Okay, so we also have an article that I wrote, again, before, sorry, that's going fast, before the first hearing. That's a picture of Dr. Gosselin. So the board also tried to do a couple other sneaky little things on this. In February, and I think the picture's down here. In February, sorry, I was at it and I didn't mean to scroll. In February, they issued a subpoena to Gosselin for the medical records of 12 patients. Let's see, sorry about this. Okay, for the medical records of 12 patients, none of which were the patients for which, or they weren't even actually patients. He was offering a service to these people, and I'll tell you more about that why. But they did ask for the medical records of 12 patients through a subpoena issued by the board secretary. Now, I bet none of you knew what broad subpoena powers these boards have, and that the secretary simply signing a subpoena like this has broad power to enforce them. A secretary on the board can ask for medical records. So these 12 people were not people who received the letters, and I knew a couple people on the list, so I reached out to them. And it turns out that the reason they saw Dr. Gosselin, at least one of them, and there are other reasons for others, was because a previous doctor, not Dr. Gosselin, was over-prescribing pain medication. They went to see Dr. Gosselin to wean off the medication. And that's the only reason she saw him. So what I think, and this is my opinion, but it kind of bears out, and now I talked to Dr. Merrill Nass about this because the same thing happened to her. I think the board look through the PMP. The PMP is Maine's Prescription Monitoring Program. That's where you can go to see what doctors write opioids and how often they write opioids and how often patients take opioids. So, in my opinion, they violated the privacy of these 12 people who had nothing to do with this hearing. They looked at private PMP records to try to bring them into this case. Fortunately, Gosselin's attorneys advised him not to respond to the subpoena, and as far as I know, he never did so, to protect his patient's privacy. So I'm going to stop the screen. I'm just going to tell you a little bit. Hopefully, Laura, this one will work because this one's super important. Okay, so this is, oh, I had added that. Okay, so here is, Laura, God, I hope you can freaking hear this because it's going to irritate the hell out of me. I did a trial run today, and everything, of course, worked perfectly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the case and explain to you what they said. So basically, the DA is saying that they're trying to act like these people he wrote letters for were patients, and that he should have done a series of steps to ensure that the patient's records were received from their primary care physician, that's one of the biggest ones. And they are acting like writing a letter, they want to hold him to a higher standard for writing a letter than, for example, pharmacies are for giving the actual injection. So pharmacies do not need to contact the primary care doctor. They do not have to keep voluminous records. They do not have to do any of the things that the board wants or thinks Dr. Gosselin should do for simply writing a letter. I mean, which is more invasive, a letter or a medical procedure? So it's kind of crazy. So the prosecutors and the board had, I call her the low talking mumbler. She was a doctor who was their expert witness, and she made absolutely zero sense. I'm gonna try one thing and see if it works. Let's see. I'm so hot. DA. Hang on. Oh, all right. Let's see if this will work. Might not, but we can try. Any luck? I really tried. And I did a whole broadcast today and played all these videos, and they all work just fine. So I have to figure out if anybody knows StreamYard and wants to jump into the stream with me and help, I can invite you. I can, let's see, as long as you don't. Okay, so I'm just going to go back. The prosecutors are saying that he has to be held to a higher standard than V clinics at McDonald's, V clinics that just pop up all over the place, V clinics at the pharmacy. Yeah, I stopped her. So anyway, tomorrow, since none of the videos are playing, the hearing started on April 14th. There was another one May 12th. April 14th was the prosecution's case. And I believe it continued a little more onto May 12th. And then the defense started its case now on tomorrow morning, starting at 9. And I'll post the Zoom link in the description once I end this broadcast. Tomorrow we're at 9 via Zoom is the rest of the defense's case. They will be having their expert witness, who is really interesting. Back in May, he discussed, he's on his medical licensing board in his state, and he completely destroyed the prosecution's expert witness. He is really smart. He knows his stuff. He knows what requirements doctors should have to write these letters, and that they don't line up with the quote 10 steps that the prosecutor's expert witness, Dr. Brandt, who again was a low talking mumbler. So if you can't hear those videos, you won't hear her at all in them. So tomorrow at 9 via Zoom, I will post the link. I'll post it here, because here's what the Maine licensing board did, which was really sneaky. They hid it in a Word document. Instead of posting the actual Zoom, not in a Word document, I mean in a PDF document, they hid it within a document. So people who aren't very sophisticated and are kind of new to the internet won't be able to figure out how to get into the hearing. But on my Maine Journal News page. I posted that. Hold on, I'm going to make this bigger, and I'll copy and post the link. Okay. So what you have to do is click on that link or copy and paste. I'll paste it again tonight on Facebook after I log off on this. So what they did is, instead of putting it on their minutes and agenda page like they used to with it just listed so you could click and go right to the Zoom, they made a link to a PDF document, made it in really small type, and then you can see the blue link within their document. So that was kind of, I thought, a little bit tricky. And while we're on tricky, I just have one thing to say about CVS. I think, well, it's my opinion, that CVS has this policy where they are refilling prescriptions without the patients requesting them. Okay, I'll post it on Facebook, Laura. I took it off, and it Facebook didn't let me click the whole thing, which is so annoying. I can go to their licensing board page, but I'll just post it on Facebook. Okay, Laura, I'll post the updated one on Facebook, and I'll even PM it to you. So CVS is calling, for example, twice they've called my doctor for a prescription that was a one-time prescription for something that I had going on, and I didn't need it anymore after that one time. Twice now they've reached out to my doctor to get a refill on a prescription that I don't need. And because I pay attention, I called them and said, I don't need that, put it back on the shelf. But a lot of people do not pay attention. If they think CVS says you have a prescription available, they'll just, especially older people, they'll go in and pick it up, even if you don't need it. And once you pick it up, you can't return it, so CVS makes the money on it. So I don't know. I'm going to look into this more, because I personally don't think it's ethical. I think it's a little tricky to reach out and ask for refills without the patient asking first. I don't know, just it doesn't sit right with me. And a CVS employee told me that they do things a little bit hinky there. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to figure out why the hell my videos aren't playing, and they played all day. And thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe and share the page or the channel with your friends. I need to get to 1,000 subscribers. I've worked on Maine Journal News for 1.5 years, all free content, but it takes so much of my time. And I need to start making a little bit money by monetizing this channel, and in order to continue to provide free content and articles and things like that on Facebook. And I really love doing it. But like I said, it takes a lot of time, and a lot of time that I could use getting a job and going out working. But I like what I'm doing, and I just hope that I can make some money. Well, thank you all. Laura, I'm going to PM you that link, and I will also post it on the Facebook page to remind everybody it's tomorrow at 9. Yeah, I'll talk to you more about that, Laura. The CVS, it's really bizarre. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you so much for bearing with me again.